Well, hello there. I'm Rod McNair,
And I'm Jonathan McNair.
and this is Brother to Brother. Welcome back on this edition of Brother to Brother. My brother ran across a article that he found interesting, and that's going to be our sort of jumping off point for today. So you want to explain what you're thinking about?
Sure. So the title of the article is "The Best Leaders Edit What They Say Before They Say It," and it's from the Harvard Business Review. It was written by Jordan Stark and Tuti Tagerley, and it's subtitled "5 Common Over-Communication Traps and How to Hone the Skill of Strategic Editing." So I thought this would be a great topic for our brother to brother, and really just going through it and bring the different points to you, comment a little bit, really good leadership information and coaching. So here we go. What they start off with in the article is the fact that for many of us, we want to be transparent. We want to be able to be open. We want to be able to be authentic. But what they say is that when you step into a leadership role, and I think in our context, it could be, frankly, it could be having been assigned a role. It could be a role that really little by little falls into your lap. Frankly, it's being a parent as opposed to being a child. I mean, in other words, when you move into a role, or that of an elder or deacon or pastor, things change in terms of our communication and the impact of our communication. And that's really the gist of the article. And they go through some traps and then make some suggestions. Okay. So something you've seen, is that in your life working with people, have you seen this as a pitfall?
Yeah, this is a great point that he's making, and I'm looking forward to going through this today. I think we can see this in a lot of different areas. We understand that communication is important, and as you said, transparency today is kind of the hallmark, and yet there's a lot of communication that sometimes would be better off not done. And I think we can see that in the political arena, and in the media. So great point.
So here are the different types of, as they refer to it in this, over communicating leaders. And this is the key we're talking about here, how we can over communicate when we're in that role of leadership. And the first one they call the straight shooter. So in other words, the leader shares unfiltered thoughts in the name of honesty. In other words, they value candor and tell it like it is, but they don't realize that what happens in a role, maybe even, let's say, up here, within a brother to brother type scenario, when you have somebody who is, let's say, for example, you take on more responsibility, your words and the way you say them are going to have a bigger impact. You were talking a story before about, was it Woodrow Wilson?
William Howard Taft.
William Howard Taft. Okay.
So as the story goes, when William Howard Taft was a Secretary of Defense or a Secretary of War, or one of those roles under Teddy Roosevelt, he had a great relationship with the press. And the reason was he was not the final decision maker. And so he had a very casual relationship, and he would make all kinds of off-the-cuff remarks. But then he succeeded to the presidency, and it's remarkable. What he quickly found out was his off-the-cuff remarks were turning out to be in articles and in newspapers as policy statements. Mm-hmm. And so he very, very quickly sort of pulled back. And actually, in an ironic twist, it wound up making it so that William Howard Taft had a reputation for being standoffish to the press, where actually he just was careful. Mm-hmm. And he recognized that he could not just sort of have a very easygoing, straight shooter relationship with reporters like he could before. Exactly what you're talking about.
And sometimes being a straight shooter can come across as blunt and uncaring. You know, as I was thinking about this point, the Proverbs 25 verse 11, that famous proverb, a word fitly spoken is like apples of gold and pictures of silver. In other words, you know, words count, and how words are said. And again, to this point, if we're not careful, we can come across as blunt and uncaring, and especially if you're frank in a way that is might be naturally on our part, you know, it might be natural to do so, but we just don't realize how blunt they come across as. So that's the point for that.
Especially when you're in charge, because when we're sort of among peers, we might just feel it as well, and just iron sharpening iron. You know, we use that term in the church, and that's scriptural. But suddenly, when you're the boss, especially when others who are peers, that can be pretty hurtful.
They're tuned in. They're tuned into the nuances of what you're saying and how you're saying it. And they can even think, because you're so straight, that you're being terse with them, that you're upset at them, you don't like them, you know. So it can be a problem. Right. The second over communicating leaders, as they talk about in the article, the second area is they call the idea generator. And what the point is with this one is that a leader can end up sharing so many ideas that people who they're working with aren't quite sure which is the one that they're trying to promote. And one thing that I've noticed with this is, and I feel like I can be guilty of this, when talking with a group of people in a meeting of some type, and you're talking about plans for something. And I feel like I'll be talking about different ideas. We could do this, or we could do this, and here's the pros and cons. In my mind, it's very clearly a brainstorming session. But I'll find out a few weeks later, I'll hear secondhand
strategic session.
I'll find out secondhand, this is what Mr. McNair said we're doing. And I look at the person, what? Where did you hear that? And they said, well, you know, it was at the meeting. And I said, well, we were just brainstorming. We were talking about as a possibility. And so I know for a fact that this can be a problem from personal experience.
Yeah, and it really comes down to knowing yourself, doesn't it? Because some people naturally gravitate to being the idea generator. Other people think more strategically, or let's say in precedent. You know, okay, well, wait a minute. Last time we said this, so how does that fit in with this? So knowing if we like to generate ideas, we just have to know that, well, we can confuse people. If it's not clear, okay, this is a brainstorming session. As the author points out, that one executive learned that he had to make it clear to his team that, okay, we are in the 5% innovation time now. And so let's not confuse that this is a new direction, you know, as opposed to let's talk about, you know, brainstorming.
And again, understanding that this is recognizing that when you're in a leadership role, your words count in a way that is different than if you're just friends talking. Or your brethren talking. Your words come across with an added meaning, an added weight. One thing with this, as I was thinking about it at this point, and that is that sometimes I think, at least I found, that it's helpful to have, let's say, brainstorming sessions with a couple or three other people that you know that you can brainstorm together with, as opposed to a larger group that you're working on a project with. Some who might not actually get the whole idea because they're working on some part of it, but they might not be as familiar with the whole project, so they can take away what you're saying in that particular session as being the final word, not realizing there's more to it. But so what I'm saying is that sometimes it can be good to brainstorm just with a smaller group, or even sometimes even one other person, especially a person that realizes that you can get all kinds of ideas and can be able to call you on it and say, really? Is that what you want to do? And then you can say, actually not, but I mean, I was thinking that direction. So sometimes even one person, and we can serve as that person. I think we can serve as the person who's the brake or the sounding board, or sometimes we can be the idea generator, and we need that sounding board as well.
It's important both ways.
The next one they have is the anxious communicator. In other words, a leader can end up, because they're not sure of themselves, because they're not confident, maybe they're still trying to decide what to do on an issue or how to deal with a problem. They end up, frankly, being they come across as uncertain because they're basically talking through everything they know about it and expressing their uncertainty. And it just comes across as being weak, anxious, and really not knowing which direction to go. And that can be a problem. And it can come, and the person can feel like they're just explaining the situation to others, but they come across in a way that causes instability.
And I think what his point is that you always need someone to sort of talk about what you are feeling anxious about and talk it through. But as you said in your last point, it may not be your strategic team. It may not be the group that you're working on with it for this activity, or if you're in charge of some aspect of the local church, you're working with a group of people. You may want to confide in just one or two other people, or maybe the pastor, maybe maybe your boss, in order to express your misgivings. I think there's a balance here, because we also don't want to, or don't need to, always act like we know every answer. Or always like, if there's any question, I don't want to appear weak. I don't want to appear like I don't know the answer. I think Mr. Weston is a great example of that. He is very clear sometimes when he will say, you know what, I'm not real sure about this right now. I think we need to think about it some more, talk about it some more, pray about it some more. I just don't know the answer to this. And he might even sometimes explain why he feels a certain way. Well, if we do this, it might turn out this way, but if we do that, it might turn out that. There's a balance there that does help your followers to understand what the parameters. But if you're always talking about the worst case scenario, that doesn't inspire confidence.
No, it creates instability. And like you're saying, that doesn't mean we need to be mysterious and not open in any way. Because I think, in other words, their point is, yes, we should be transparent, but we need to recognize that if we show that we're anxious and worried, and we even change our decisions back and forth again and again, and we show anxiety in the way that we're expressing ourselves, as opposed to even saying we don't know, like you're mentioning. What happens is it's unnerving to a team. And what needs to be expressed is a reasoned, careful, and deliberate approach towards leadership, as opposed to expressing all our fears and worries in front of everybody that we bump into.
Right.
So it's a balance.
Doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
No. The TMI leader, number 4, the TMI leader. They talk about in the article how some work cultures.
So what's TMI?
Too much information.
Okay.
Too much information. So they say that in some cultures, that emphasize authenticity. The saying is, bring your whole self to work. In other words, share everything, because that makes people feel closer. And their point is that, okay, we need to be open, but not so open that we blur boundaries of too much information, and our personal life becomes fodder for everybody that we're working with. Again, as a leader, what happens is that is not helpful.
Yeah.
That does not inspire confidence when we're not striking a good balance in how we approach people with being open. And I think there is something to share in our personal life,
Yeah.
in a way that's balanced. But what they're saying is it can be too much.
This makes me think of Spokesman Club, because we are taught to, especially in some of the assignments, to open up, to reveal something about yourself, the heart to heart speech, that sort of thing, the icebreaker even. But there is a line that we don't want to cross, do we?
Right.
Where we share so much information, it's so private, it makes the audience feel uncomfortable. And if you think of speech training as really leadership training, learning to stand up and learning to communicate well,
right, and influence.
There is a fine art of knowing how to share yourself and knowing how to be genuine and authentic, and not so open that everyone in the audience is uncomfortable and wonders, are you going to make it? Are you going to? So that's a real life example.
Here's another part to that I'm thinking, and that is not just emotionally and things that really are private and personal, but having too much of ourselves in, let's say, our leadership. I mean, for example, I think of it in terms of speaking. I think there's a balance. I think it's important that we do speak from our life's experience, but there can be too much of us in a message, where it's about us,
right?
And it's not about the Bible, the scriptures, what God has to say. It's about us, and our experience. That's a danger, and I think our leadership can be about us as well. Our leadership and our talk, it can be about us, as opposed to the goals of the project or what we're doing or it's about us.
Right.
And that's too much information as well. You can fall into that category.
That's an interesting point. In our communication, we can either be the hero or the goat. We can always be the champion and no one else can compare, or we can always be the I did it wrong, and here, I'm going to tell you what I did wrong so you don't do that. But if every example is what you did wrong, eventually
people wonder why should they listen to you?
Why are you leading the team? So you're right. There is a aspect, and frankly, like you said, it comes down to maybe shining the light too much on me. As opposed to, let's think of the context of the church. If I am organizing something, if I have a responsibility in the local congregation, should I not always be, let's say, no matter what we're doing, what we're organizing, what we're putting together, should I not always be sort of pointing beyond myself?
Right, to the work, the objectives, to the church, what we're doing,
to the pastor or to whoever is in charge over me, that look, whatever we decide here, we need to check with him. Are we conforming with what he wants? But also, like you're saying, to the overall objective, to headquarters, to the work, to what God is trying to accomplish in all of us. We always want to point to beyond ourselves and not just to ourselves, and really TMI probably happens when we're just pointing too much to ourselves.
I think so. Number 5, the the detailed over explainer. This is basically somebody that in their communication ends up going down every single side road. We may have done a little bit of that this last time in our examples, but I don't know. I don't think so. But you know how you can have a meeting where you wonder, where are we going with this? Because the person they're going all over the place and explaining every little thing. I think sometimes as a leader and how we communicate, we ought to remember who's our audience, who is the group that we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we need to talk about things that think about how we need to talk about things that apply to everybody that's there.
Yeah.
And then if we need to explain more, talk more about some part of the process, we'll then spend the time with the individual.
Yeah.
It may only be one person that you need to with that, but not explain everything to everybody. It's just not necessary. And it can be, to their point, it really can make us ineffective as a leader and communicator.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think I can sort of fall into this category sometime. Do you hear that?
That's our loudspeaker.
Okay. It's about time to go.
They're telling us we need to go home.
We're going to shut this down pretty soon, but I'm going to explain some more since I'm telling you that I'm bearing my heart. I'm bearing my soul here.
Are you
over-explaining it?
Or is this TMI? Or which one of these is this?
Maybe both. But you're right. Sometimes a person can feel like, well, I want to make sure that who is my audience here knows everything I know. And in some ways, it almost is as a matter of not taking responsibility yourself, as opposed to not throw a shotgun of information at them, but rather what do they need to know?
Yeah.
And how is it best to sum up what you need to sum up? And then, as you said, give detailed information where you need to do so.
You know how you can do this is a lot, I think, is saying we start on a topic and we're explaining, let's say the family weekend that's coming up, and say, last year we did have the family weekend, and remember what was his name who was there and it was really involved, and let's see, his name was, I can't remember that, but do you remember that was and before long people are saying, I don't care.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter.
This is the meeting, trying to figure out, call somebody on the phone to find out.
Or they start telling a joke. Well, it's like the story. Now, how did that story go? And no, I'm telling the punchline before the joke, and before long you're thinking, okay, can we get, to the, I say we're thinking, because I probably do this just as much as anybody else, I imagine, but it's easy to over explain, and that's their point. Part of it is because when you're in a leadership role, you have a little bit of a captive audience.
Right.
People are supposed to be, or when we're dealing with a leader in a meeting, in a group, in some type of a scenario,
we have to respect that.
We have to respect it. So what happens is oftentimes we're in situations where it's a captive audience.
Yeah.
Out of respect and courtesy, people have to listen.
Yeah.
We shouldn't abuse that. We need to think about how can we be better communicators so people want to work with us and for us.
And it doesn't mean that it's like Joe Friday, just the facts.
No, of course not.
It's not just a bullet point of communication. There is
the personal touch,
the personal touch, personality, but yeah, it can go too far.
So here's a couple points that they recommend. Number one, recognize that everything you say or don't say carries weight. So it's just the point. What you were talking about, Woodrow Wilson, or
no, you. That's what you said last time, but it's still not him. William Howard Taft.
William Howard Taft. Okay, Woodrow Wilson, William Howard Taft, whoever.
Not Woodrow Wilson.
Okay,
He was a different.
recognize that everything you say or don't say carries weight. Wasn't he that president who was really,
He was
Really
He was.
hefty,
He was
big
pretty,
guy.
pretty stout. Yeah.
everything you say or don't say carries weight
Right.
in a way that it may not have before you were fulfilling that role.
And like you said before, we see this as parents. When you're a parent and when you're working with children, and you realize sometimes perhaps maybe you're teasing, and maybe teasing is good. There's a lot of value in it, but sometimes it can cross the line into actually being hurtful. Maybe
Yeah.
the context, maybe who's around, and so as a person who has really, you do carry weight. You have authority as a parent. Well, let's say, for example, I'm way over explaining, aren't I?
Just like Woodrow Wilson.
No, it's William Howard Taft.
Oh,
Okay, not Woodrow Wilson. So anyway, we could title this, "It's Not Woodrow Wilson."
You are
Anyway.
okay.
So, for example, if you're a parent and your teen is in a group of friends,
Mm-hmm.
that is not the time to bore in and be teasing your son or daughter. Why? Because you're in a position of authority. They can't help it. They can't do anything about it, and yet that teasing can be misplaced and hurtful.
Yeah. And I mean, I think about that in terms of our children. If a friend says to them, "You're stupid," okay, that's one thing. They're just friends.
Yeah.
If you say to your child anything negative, if you say to your daughter a negative comment about her or her appearance, that is so hurtful.
It may stick with them for life.
It may,
It
and
probably will.
and the same thing can happen with, I'll say, a leader in the church. I know people have told me in talking about something that happened years gone by, and you think they must have had all kinds of good experiences in the church.
Yeah.
But they'll say, well, here's why I will or won't do such and such. I won't come to club.
Mhm.
I never again will come to club. Because 35 years ago, the pastor, in his evaluation after my speech, said such and such.
Mhm.
And you think, really? Okay. I mean, you think, wow, you haven't gotten past that?
Right.
But it was the pastor. It was the pastor who said that. And now every time they face the pastor, they're thinking that's what the pastor thinks of me, and it had a huge impact. In my head, I'm thinking of an individual who told me that, and I think, wow, that's sad.
Yeah.
So that's the point: is that we do have to recognize that we have an impact when we're in a leadership role that is, you might say, larger than just a friend, peer, acquaintance.
Right.
We have to remember that. The second point.
Well, and getting back to the title of this whole article, the best leaders edit what they say before they say it. All too often, most of us say things and then think about it.
You're right.
As opposed to, there a lot of times choosing different words
Yeah.
makes a huge difference.
I love the title. That's what really caught my eye, because you're so right. Edit what you say before you say it. Think about, and that's the point.
Right.
Think about what we're going to say. And as I was thinking about what we're talking about here, I couldn't help but be reminded of that old maxim: it's better to be thought a fool and be silent than to speak up and remove all doubt. Our words, they have an impact on those around us.
Right.
Especially when we're in a leadership role, it is a magnified impact.
Yeah.
Number 2, clarify your audience and outcome. In other words, remember who you're speaking to. Remember to whom you are communicating. That's their point. What's the big picture? You don't always have to fix every problem. You don't always have to address every issue in a meeting, in a conversation. That's a hard part. I think we have, especially when we are in a conversation with somebody and we realize, and in a leader role within a congregation, maybe because we're older, as an elder member in the church, that's a leadership role because we should be very familiar with doctrine and the history of the church. And somebody else is talking in a conversation and they say something that's not exactly right. Now, I'm not talking about outright heresy, but they get something just a little bit off and they're going on talking. You have to ask yourself, do I correct them, for what they said, or do I let it be? And I think this happens in conversation. But the point is we have to remember who we're talking to and what's the objective of our conversation or our gathering.
Yeah.
If we're going to be impactful. I'll give the third one: prepare or pause. So the point here is that certainly it's best in a conversation, meeting, interaction, what have you, to be well prepared. But there comes a time when we're not prepared for what we face, what is said, what is asked, or what have you.
Yeah.
And their point in this is, if we're going to edit what we say before we say it, sometimes simply pausing and thinking about it is the best strategy.
Yeah.
And that's hard for us to do. It's hard for us not just to jump in and start answering, and then we go around in circles. We don't give a clear answer. We don't give an answer that is mindful of some of these points we've mentioned.
Right.
And it comes across in a wrong way. So they say, just pause. Maybe even like you said about Mr. Weston, let's think about it. Maybe we talk about it next week, because I'm not sure right now. But
Yeah.
pausing and thinking.
Right. I find it interesting. He says it means developing strong impulse control. Well, that's hard for all of us, when we're in terms of talking and communication, and recognizing in the moment when an idea surfaces that's half formed or emotionally charged. Have you noticed that? Yeah, there are times when something comes up and you kind of know that it's emotionally charged, and you feel like, oh, don't take the bait, but you feel like you have to say something. You don't have to say something.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, thinking and waiting and considering and letting it percolate a little bit, you actually come up with a better answer.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't need to answer. Sometimes
that's right.
Sometimes it's a matter of, well, let me think about it. And sometimes it's not even taking the monkey on your back because you just don't have all the facts.
Mm-hmm.
But it's saying, why don't you bring me some more facts about that? Why don't you find the scripture that you're saying the Bible says? Where does it say that in the Bible? If you can go back, where does it say that? When they're trying to challenge you on something, where does it say that? Well, I'm not sure. So tell you what, go do a little more research and bring me the verse, and I can answer better, or we can talk about it. Or look, thank you. I'll do a little research on it. Why don't you ask me next time I'm in town?
Yeah.
Not saying necessarily always I will get back to you, because now you're carrying around the responsibility to answer, maybe to a degree that it's really not necessary.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think it's helpful even to say, look, can we talk about this next time we get together? But anyway, we're getting a little bit off, but it is the idea of not having to give an instant response. That's what they're saying.
Our dad used to say that when someone wanted an instant response, he would say, well, I'll consider the matter. And oftentimes, you remember he would talk about how there are some people who pressure you, who want an answer right away, who won't give up. And he would just say, I'll consider the matter. If you want an answer right now, then
That's
no,
it. Yeah.
whatever. But if you want a thoughtful answer, let me think about it.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in that. It's actually it's actually helping you to come up with a better answer.
The last strategy is frame your message strategically. In other words, what they're saying is framing your message in a polite way, in a respectful way, in a way that that recognizes the importance of our body language. All of those things is really important as a leader because of the impact of our communication if we're in that role.
You know, I have to think about this in terms of, again, another thing that our dad used to say, that if you're speaking up at the pulpit, you really need to, the way he put it, you need to think like a lawyer. In other words, you need to understand that whatever words you say, whatever words you said from the pulpit, what would they seem like? What would they look like if they're in an article of the New York Times tomorrow morning? You know, how are they going to look? And oftentimes, if we're not careful, we can have, let's say we have the responsibility to speak in front of the congregation. And yet, if we're not careful, maybe we haven't thought through our concepts enough.
Yeah.
We haven't thought through the wording enough. You know, they say that Winston Churchill would spend hours and hours and hours and hours practicing to get the right word, to get exactly what he wanted said. And not that we want to, if we're speaking from the pulpit, that we just read it word for word. But at the same time, thinking strategically means think ahead, that what if my words were taken out of context, or if I'm being sloppy, if I'm thinking, you know, if I haven't thought through this concept, and I'm just going to wait until, you know, I go up there and then hope the Spirit moves me, and I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. That is not a good policy for speaking.
I remember one of the first sermons I gave, I had this analogy that but I came up with it at the last minute. And it was, I can't remember the specifics, except that it was about a tomato and a tomato plant and a rotten tomato.
Yeah.
All I remember is I was about halfway through the analogy and applying to a scripture when I realized that the analogy that I was creating actually disproved the point I was trying to make with this scripture. And
that was a good time to come to that
I literally had to say, hold on a second. I don't think that works. So let's go on to the next passage. You know, let's go on to the next scripture. And hoping that everybody just forgot everything I was saying at that point.
You know, I have a similar story. I gave a talk one time, and I was describing a certain tree and from a scripture in the Bible, and pulling certain concepts from it. And somebody actually in the little question and answer we had afterwards said, actually, that tree is not like that. It actually is this way. So it sort of totally undid my point. And I had to say,
well, didn't you just say, well, it doesn't matter. The point
well,
is,
anyway,
the point is right. Forget if it's accurate in the way I explained it. There is one last point they make I'd forgotten about, and that is it's framed as this: pressure test. This is number 5, by the way.
Yeah.
Pressure test your communication. Basically, it's saying, look, it's helpful to bounce what you're going to say off of somebody else, somebody who knows you, somebody who has a sense of maybe even the context, the audience. It's worthwhile to work through some of your ideas, especially if they're complicated or they're maybe moving a little bit different direction, and maybe
it could be taken wrong.
It could be taken wrong. Yeah. Maybe it's something you want to implement in a congregation in terms of how you do something. I'm just talking about how you administer, how you work with something. You want to start having a new activity. You want to do something in regard to a family weekend or some type of a church activity, or you want to have a new hall, you want to rent a new hall and there's one available, but before you just say this is what we're going to do, and you say to the congregation, having some time and pressure testing it with at least another person who understands the scenario is really wise, because they may come up with thoughts that you haven't thought of, and it's and that way before you end up with egg on your face. Because the decisions that you make, how you communicate them, and that may be part of it. They may say, look, when you say this, you need to remind people that although it may be further away from some people, it's closer to others. So talking about a church hall, let's say, for example. So pressure test your communication.
This works in the home let's say as a father, before making grand pronouncements of new policies, for the whole family, maybe it might be worth talking to your wife.
Oh,
and
that's an interesting idea.
If it has if it has to do with your children, because otherwise, what if that when you make the grand announcement, and I'm not speaking from experience at all, when you make the grand announcement,
I think you're oversharing now. So by the way, I think the TMI
that puts her in an awkward spot.
Yeah,
she either has to say, well, wait a minute, what about this? What about this? Or whatever. So very, very helpful to, hey, talk about, in that case, in a father-mother situation, oftentimes a mother is more in tune with what's going on the day-to-day basis with children, etc. Talk about it first, and doesn't mean that you're going to go a different direction, but you get some really good, helpful feedback.
As a pastor, bouncing things off elders, deacons, those who are going to be involved in the implementation of an idea, a change, or something you're going to do, is really wise. So they don't get blindsided. And they buy in, and they can also express a potential problem. And to their point here, how it needs to be communicated so people don't get the wrong idea. That's important in a congregation as well as in a family.
So any final thoughts on this topic of editing your words before you say them?
I just think their point about, and I guess we're, this is a little bit redundant, I suppose, but their point about how it's important that we learn to consider our words not just for ourselves, for our reputation, for, I don't know, the entertainment value of people liking us and liking to listen to us or liking the stories we tell. No, when you're in a role of responsibility, I mean, it's just like Woodrow Wilson when he moved into a new role.
It wasn't Woodrow Wilson.
Well, you get the point. It was still when he moved into that new role. I'm just kidding. Okay, I'm just teasing. Just so you know, I do know now it was William Howard Taft, right?
Thank you.
Okay.
That's better.
But it is the point. It is the point that he was wise in recognizing the transition and how he had to mind his words. That was really wise, and that was that's admirable, and I think that's a great insight into the wisdom that he had in the role that he had to serve, even if he was not, as you mentioned, he was not maybe as adored by the press, because of his role. He had to be a little bit more aloof, yet he was able to do the job better by making that transition and understanding the impact of his words.
I find it so interesting that he succeeded Teddy Roosevelt. He kind of came up under Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt is known as all these things we're talking about. He was the straight shooter. He was the way over communicator. But he's adored. He is, held up as a hero in American culture, and yet he really got himself in a lot of trouble because of that very trait.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Woodrow Wilson, I mean, William Howard Taft is really not valued as much, and yet probably was more careful in his words. And just an interesting thing that even in our culture.
Yeah, definitely. Okay.
So.
Well,
So
good. Thanks for taking the time to review this. Hope it's useful. Hope it's helpful to the folks out there who are listening.
yeah. So thanks for joining us. This has been Rod McNair
And Jonathan McNair.
and we've been with you. What are we doing? Oh, it's called Brother to Brother. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.